Chancellor Rishi Sunak is set to extend furlough until July when he announces his budget in the House of Commons next week. With the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing his roadmap for easing national lockdown restrictions, there was a strong hint that government financial support packages will be extended in the budget next Wednesday. In this video, we take a look at those extensions and how they could interact with the roadmap to recovery. Yesterday was the day that so many people have been waiting for, with a more definitive plan, a roadmap, if you like, to ease national lockdown restrictions and start a return to some form of normality. But that roadmap is reasonably cautious and it's going to take time for the economy to fully reopen. Until that happens, until businesses can get back on their feet, the government's going to need to extend its package of financial support measures, including the furlough scheme. There has been a massive amount of speculation ahead of the budget next Wednesday about whether or not Chancellor Rishi Sunak will start to increase taxes or extend spending. And it's now looking increasingly like it will be the latter. Keep in mind, this is the first budget that Chancellor Rishi Sunak has presented to the House of Commons since the real onset of the pandemic. Sure, we've had emergency financial statements from him, but never a carefully considered, planned and budgeted budget. As things stand, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, or Furlough, is set to come to an end in April. That scheme has been running since last March, and it's funded millions of jobs across the UK during that time, preventing thousands of businesses from going under. Despite the massive cost to the Treasury for paying for these various financial support measures, spending more than £300 billion to date, the Chancellor is going to need to do more in his budget next week. We are still in this pandemic, and while there is a roadmap out of it, that is several months away in most cases. But the Chancellor has to strike the right balance. He's facing growing calls from Tory backbenchers to start balancing his books, to start repaying some of this massive national debt. I still maintain that it is too soon to start raising most taxes. We are likely, in the budget next Wednesday, to see an increase in the rate of corporation tax, or at least an announcement about the intention to raise corporation tax, probably starting in the autumn. But personal taxes are very unlikely to be hiked this time round. One senior government source has told The Sun newspaper, obviously Rishi will be making a big announcement about this next week, but it is safe to say that COVID measures aren't going to be turned off. And we had a strong hint from the Prime Minister Boris Johnson yesterday that the furlough scheme in particular would be extended, when he insisted the government will continue to do whatever it takes to protect jobs for the duration of the pandemic. So it looks very likely that the furlough scheme will be extended from the end of April until at least July, possibly longer, possibly into the autumn. Much will depend with the progress made on Boris Johnson's already quite cautious roadmap. As a reminder then of the various steps on that roadmap, step 1A in fact, which comes into force Monday week, on Monday the 8th of March, is when we see all schools and college students return. It's likely to be a phased return for secondary schools, where 3 rapid lateral flow tests have to be carried out when they go back. And there's also a great deal of unhappiness amongst children and parents about the mandatory wearing of face masks for secondary aged pupils through until at least Easter. We also have step 1B, which happens on Monday the 29th of March. That's when outdoor gatherings are allowed to take place again under the old rule of 6, or 2 households meeting outdoors. The government's message to stay at home is going to be replaced by a message to stay local, and some outdoor sports facilities will reopen, things like tennis courts and golf courses. And then we move into step 2 in April, Monday the 12th of April. That's when non-essential retailers, hairdressers and close contact services can reopen. Pubs and restaurants can also reopen, but only for outdoor seated service. We're also going to see some of the rules relaxed around funerals, where up to 30 people will be able to attend, and weddings with up to 15 people. And then into May, on Monday the 17th of May, that's step 3, when the rule of 6 is scrapped outdoors. Indoor hospitality venues will reopen, including cinemas, soft play areas, and the rest of the accommodation sector. And smaller outdoor sports venues will also be allowed to reopen. We may also see in May the possible return of international travel. And then finally, last but not least, step 4, which is Monday the 21st of June. This is the step everyone's becoming very excited about, very focused on. It's when the last remaining legal restrictions will be lifted, assuming, of course, all goes to plan. Remaining hospitality venues will reopen. Even nightclubs can open again on the 21st of June. And large events and performances will be able to restart with full capacity crowds. Now, This roadmap, these various steps from 1 to 4, all depend on the progress being made with the vaccination programme and also on the rate of infection and hospitalisations. So there'll be a lot of focus on the R number we hear so much about. It is a cautious roadmap to reopen the economy with this 5-week gap between each of the main stages. That's to allow 4 weeks to understand the implications of opening up the previous stage, and then another week to analyse the data and for the government to make a decision on whether or not we can move on to the next step. In thinking about the continued financial support the government will need to provide, the Chancellor's probably going to need to take a quite varied approach to support in some of the different sectors. Some of the business types which won't be able to reopen until the later stages of the roadmap, for example nightclubs, they're likely to need a lot more support financially than the other sectors which have remained open throughout this pandemic, or those that can open quite quickly. And while we don't expect to see widespread tax rises in the budget next week, government sources have told the press that the Chancellor is expected to lay down markers for future tax rises so he can start balancing the books. It's been quite widely reported, as I mentioned a moment ago, that corporation tax is likely to rise, starting later this year, going up in stages from its current level of 19% all the way up to 24%. And higher earners are apparently also likely to face tax rises too. But a lot of the detail around tax rises, I think, is going to have to wait until the autumn budget. Once the economy is reopened, once hopefully this economic recovery is underway. I think the words we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday in the House of Commons were quite telling. He said, in view of these cautious but I hope irreversible changes, people may be concerned about what these changes mean for the various support packages, for livelihoods, for people and the economy. So I want to reassure the House we will not pull the rug out. For the duration of the pandemic, the government will continue to do whatever it takes to protect jobs and livelihoods across the UK. And the Chancellor will set out further details in the budget next Wednesday. So as well as hearing about an extension to the furlough scheme next week, we also expect to hear details about a 4th round of grant funding for the self-employed income support scheme, and also extensions to the business rates relief package, which was due to expire next month. Boris Johnson has set Rishi Sunak a fairly high bar here, pledging to do whatever it takes, and he's going to have to deliver on that promise in his budget next week. My biggest concern when it comes to this is the need for some crossover, some buffer between when the economy is able to reopen and when businesses are able to stand on their own 2 feet. It simply won't work to end government support packages on the same day businesses are allowed to reopen, and that's because it's going to take some time for businesses to start trading again, to rebuild their own balance sheets, to bring staff back off furlough. We should not expect that to happen on day one. Therefore, the Chancellor is going to need to continue some of his support schemes for possibly several months after businesses are allowed to reopen and start trading again. We've seen today the latest official unemployment figures, with the jobless rate rising to 5.1% in the 3 months to December. That was its highest level in almost 5 years, and the figures show that younger workers bear the brunt of the job losses. The number of people on company payrolls fell by 726,000 compared to their pre-pandemic levels, and almost 3 in 5 of those job cuts were experienced by people under the age of 25. Unemployment is expected to continue rising, probably peaking this summer at around 7.5%, but much will depend on any extension to the furlough scheme, and also, of course, progress with reopening the economy in lines of this roadmap, what we're seeing in terms of the dates here. Jonathan Athu, ONS Deputy National Statistician for Economic Statistics, said, "Our survey shows that the unemployment rate has had the biggest annual rise since the financial crisis. However, the proportion of people who are neither working nor looking for work has stabilised after rising sharply at the start of the pandemic, with many people who lost their jobs early on having now started looking for work." What do you expect to see in the budget from Rishi Sunak next week? Do you agree with my forecast that the furlough scheme will be extended until July and that other government financial support measures will also be extended? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.